Okay. What is class and object? So to know it better, we should start it with a question. Please explain the differences of analysis method and system design between the conventional paradigm and object-oriented paradigm. Okay, conventional paradigm belongs to the structural paradigm. Okay, do you have any idea about this? So the answer would be the conventional paradigm are focused at the process, and also the data are separated from the procedure, and it's also a functional decomposition. Okay, and for the object-oriented paradigm would be like focus at the object domain and not the procedure, and also data and procedure its function are saved inside an object, and it's decomposed based on the data. For the conventional paradigm, the, the usual step that being conducted by the programmers and the analysis would be like you want to create something, and from it the system will be reconstructed. The requirement level would be one design and one system, and for each function, usually it will be separated by a different file, where usually a function A belong to one file and the other function belong to the other file. So the relationship between the code and the functions usually one-to-one. It means that one function, one file, programming file or programming code file. So this is usually called a modular programming method. So usually a function being breakdown into one module, where one module belongs to one file. And it will be a different story if you created an object-oriented uh, method, where, like it said in the previous slide, that the application will be breaking down into objects, where object will be uh, where object will become a class. The real world object will become a class in a programming uh, application. So where a class in a design method will become a lot of design uh, design model. Okay, as I already explained that the modeling in object oriented will be using UML modeling language or unified modeling language. Okay, where one class can be consist of several design. There are a step chart diagram, class diagram, use case diagram, activity diagram, and so on. So to define one class, you need a several model. And for the class, and it's also stand for another class. So each class in object-oriented programming will be consist of several diagrams. So it will be difficult to create the diagram. I would say no, because the more complete or the more or more let's say, uh, more specific of the model that you create, then it will be easier for the programmer to create a clear application. Okay, so okay. Do you have any question until now? Not yet?
In chat, sir.
Okay, so for the functional decomposition, usually the system will decompose into several functions, like I already mentioned. And the data can be shared by and used together along the system. It means that you have one data, then the data will be shared into another function. So if you change this data structure, let's say, then all the function will have to change how the access to the data also. So this is why I said to you that the the structural concept, the failure in the structural programming language will have a higher chance of the whole application failure because they use this kind of method. They can share the data along with a lot of system or a lot of function, and every change you need a really detailed, uh, every changing or every modification in the application require a lot of concentration. You have to make sure that all the related function or all the related data that being used together uh, will also have to be modified. So this kind of uh, point of view of this kind of programming method is quite difficult. For the if you don't have any mistake or if you don't have any problem with the application, that yes, this is easier. But when you find out or if you conducted a modification in this application, then it will be a nightmare because like I said to you, usually it's function related with other function. It's data related with a lot of function. So when you modify one function, you also have to modify all the related function. If your application only consists of two function or three, then maybe it's not a big deal. But uh, in my experience, usually the function will be more than 100 or maybe 200 functions. So you can imagine how hard it will be. So unlike the object-oriented decomposition, where the system is decomposed into several objects, and the object in the application will communicate each other by sending messages without modifying or without sharing the attribute directly. So if you want to use the attribute or the data from object A, the object B will send a message, hey, object A, I would like to use your attribute. And the object A will give the attribute, not sharing the attribute, will give the value of the attribute. So object B will only can accessing the attribute, not accessing it. The object B will only get the value of the attribute by requesting the value from the object A. So object B cannot access directly to the attribute. It have to ask the object A to give it to the object B. So this is the common or the general concept of the object-oriented method. So its object uh, let's see, responsible for its own attribute and function. Its object don't have any relation direct. It have a relationship, but only limited by the sending message relationship, not accessing the data itself. So if you make a modification in object B, then all other objects in the application will not be disturbed. Okay, and all the other objects uh, will know you don't have to make a modification with the other object. So that is why if you make the modification in a single object or two object, the whole application will not be disturbed. And the functional decomposition focus will be the system will be decomposed into several functions by using a hierarchical structure. This module will be consist of process and function. And in an object-oriented focus, the real-world objects are working together as a non-hierarchical structure. So in object-oriented, there are no hierarchy. Uh, there is a hierarchy, but not explicitly hierarchy like in the functional decomposition. Okay? The structure of the application is not hierarchical. It means that object A only communicate with other object and so on. So what is an object and what is the anatomy of an object and how can an object interact with the outside world? So you have to make it clear in your mind first. Usually an object will be consist of three things. Okay, the first thing would be concrete things or things that you can touch, the things that you can see, the things that you can interact with directly. That is a concrete thing. And the other things that can become an object is a concept. It means that you cannot see it, but you know it exists, like a transaction, cost subject, ledger. Okay? This is a concept things that can become uh, an object in application. So it's not necessarily always become a solid object. So an object can also become coming from a concept. Okay? And the other thing, an object can also become coming from an abstraction. Abstraction is like it's the things is exists, but it's not clear as a solid object. You can still see the object, but uh, the the let's say the object of an abstract object is still unclear. Like let's say it's a company. In a company will can be consist of a lot of objects. Or the abstraction, the other abstraction would be like university. Okay, in a university you will find a lot of objects, but you still can use this kind of abstraction object to become uh, an object candidate. So these are the three things that you can keep in your mind to be your solid base ground when you have to define an object. What is an object? You have to think about this condition. An object can become a solid things or concrete things, can be coming from a concept things, and also can be coming from an abstraction things. Okay, so a real world object have an attribute. What is attribute? Attribute is basically or theoretically means internal value or related data of an object that can show the identity or a nature of an object, and also it can become a state of an object. Okay, so what is the identity of an object? Let's say you have color. Color can be an identity of an object. I have a car object, then the identity of this object would be the color of the, the, the car object, the brand of the car object. and the style, the cylinder, the cylinder type of this card object. And what about the state of the object? The state can become the status, where the status can be active or inactive, okay? Stop or moving, that can become a state of an object. The light on or off, that can become a state or the condition of the object. Or you can say it's a new or a second or use, that can become a state of an object. So the attribute itself consists of two things. The first thing would be identity, and the other thing would be the state. So these two things, you can define it as an attribute of an object. And what about the methods of an object? A method usually describe about the behavior that will define the act, or will define the activity of the object. And it also can be define a reaction of an object. So related with this function, and also it can become a related activity that will modify the attribute of the object itself. Like, let's say you have a car object, then you can have a function that can modify the name of the object of the object. Okay, so what this statement means is you have a function that can modify the attribute of the object beside the other activity that can describe the behavior of the methods. Like, let's say the car can move forward. The method is not modifying the, 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 the object itself, but it have a action of the object. Okay, and in object oriented, then the behavior will be called as method or service. And also, one thing that you have to know that in object-oriented programming, you have to define a real activity so it will not confusing you. Like let's say in this example, you have a swimming method, where a swimming method uh, can become a fish method or a diver method. So you don't have, it's not necessarily for you to separate the name of the activity, unlike in the structural programming, where to object you cannot use the same name function for the same activity but belongs to other, or a different function. You need to define another name or another yes, you need to define another name, even though that the name is, sorry, even though that the function or the method is the same. Unlike in object oriented, where it's encourage you to use the real activity, so the real activity name, even though that the object is different. Like in this example, you can see that there are two objects that having the same name of the function. Okay, so the object's anatomy would be the object's name, the attribute of the object, and also the method of the object. So you can say that an object will be consist of attribute and method. So if it's only consists of attribute, then only, or if it only consists of the method only, then you cannot call it as an attribute. Sorry, we cannot call it as an object. So we can simplify this kind of understanding, but by saying that an object would be only consist of attribute and method. And how the outside work of an object communicate is by sending a message each other. So let's say we have this object, we have a circle object, and then based on the anatomy object, we need to define the object name, we need to define the attributes, we also need to define the operation of the methods. Then we have a complete object definition. The object name is circle, and the attribute of the object would be the center position, the radius length, the fill color, and the operation or the method of this object would be show, hide, or move to. And this is also another example of an object. So we have a vehicle object, and the attribute would be this one, and the method would be this one, and the other subclass object or the inheritance object would be the car, minivan, truck, and school bus. So from this meeting until the last meeting, I would like you to define three things. Firstly, you will define a real world object. Okay, so from this real world object, you will define, you will create a blueprint of this object. The blueprint of this object will be now called class. Okay, so firstly you define the real world object, and then you create the class from this object. Okay, so if I said real world object, it means that the real world object that you will that will the real world object will be using the application. From this real world object, then will be created. Then you will creating the class for this real world object. Okay, and if we said about this class of the real world object, okay, so if I said, or if I mention about class, it means that it's already in a application site. Okay, not in a programming, not in the real world site anymore. It's already in a programming site. Okay, so this class then, like I already mentioned, is a blueprint or a template of an application, or a template of an object, because definitively from this class you can create a lot of object. This is not a real world object, this is a application object. So you can create a lot of object from a single class. Okay, so I will differentiate it, the terms, by using real world object, class, and object. So the object here and the real world object is different. This is belong to the real world things, and this is belong to the application object. Okay, this is another example of a class. I will explain it later. So what is class and how to define the components of a class? It's the component of the class also similar with the component of the object, because like I said, the class is a representation of a real world object. Okay, we have a question like, what is the system design? System design is a model before you create a the application. Okay. So before, like I already explained to you last week, before you create a house, you have to create the design. So the system design would be this uh, this uh, this house design or the architecture of the design. So before you create the application, you have to create the design of the application first. Okay, back to the explanation. Class like in the real object, where an object in application can be grouped into a class. Okay, so let's say in the real world object, uh, you wanted you wanted to create a learning management system application, let's say. So in that application, I will be my role player will be a teacher, and your role player will be a student. So in this case, there are different roles between you and me. Okay, where I am standing, my role player will be a teacher, and your role player will be student. So in this matter, the object between you and the object between me is are different. Okay, but if you like to create another application, let's say market or mini market application, where there will be no differences between you and me, where I will become a customer and you will also become a customer. So the most important things for you to define an object is based on the role of the object. Okay, like I already mentioned before, you have to see the real what is the role player of the object. I can become a teacher and also can become a customer, and I also can become another role player, or maybe I can become a patient, or I can become a expertise, or something else, and it will be depends on the role that you you found, or depends on the role of the the role how to interact with each other. Okay, so a class is a general definition because you can name it as a pattern or a template or a blueprint or a blueprint to grouping the similar object that share the same attribute or and method. And class define the attribute and function definition of an object, and a class can also be a subclass. Okay, a class can also become a subclass from a general class. So this is a this is a advanced class. It means that a general class usually is a single object things, but uh, in some situation you have to have some specific class that have a different role with the general class. Let's say I have a okay, this one would be, this is what the so this is a superclass of person. In general, all human or all person have name and date birth. Okay, and this person is too general. Then for an employee is a person, but it have a specific role in the system. So in object-oriented concept, you need to inherit the employee from a person class. It means that the class that inherited by another class, okay, let's say this class employee, will have all the attributes and the methods from the person class. Okay, this is the inheritance concept in object-oriented. So if you have defined, if you already defined the superclass person, and then you inherited the class into another subclass, okay, in this method names employee, it means that it's not necessarily for you to define these attributes again in this class, because like I said previously, if a class is inherited into another class, it means that the mother class or the superclass attribute and method will be sending or not sending. All the attribute and all the method in the superclass, uh, the subclass will also have the the method and the attribute from the mother class. It means that all of this, sorry, all of this attribute and method will be given into the employee class. The employee class will also have this attribute and method. And what about if the class or the employee class is not specific enough? Then you can inherit it into another subclass. Okay. So in this matter, the employee class is inherited into an instructor class. It means that all of these attribute and method will also be given into the instructor class. So even though that in this instructor class you only see these two attributes, but in generally in programming or in object concept, the instructor class will also have this attribute, and this instructor class will also these attributes. Okay, and the instructor class will have all the method from the previous class. Okay, so this concept will can only apply backward. It means that the instructor class have the method from the mother class before, but the the employee class, sorry, but the employee class don't have this method. Okay, the employee class don't have this method because it's moving forward. Okay, like I said, it's a um, backward activity. It means that the subclass will have all the attribute and the method from its superclass or its mother class, but the mother class or the superclass don't have the method of the subclass or the child class. Okay, so what I can say that the superclass will not have all the attribute and all the method of the child class. So the class component will be a collection of attribute and the collection of method, and also it have an access level. So access level uh, will be explained or will be described as an encapsulation. Okay, encapsulation concept is a class access level. So there are three access level in a class. there is a private, there are private, protected, and public. Okay, but there are a fourth class access level, but this is only specific to several programming language. Okay, and in this case, the package access level only belongs to the Java programming language. In other language, you will not find the package access level. So that is why, in general, the access level will only consist of 3 access level. But for the Java programming language, you will find a 4th access level, which is the name is package. So what is the difference between package and the others? Okay, I will explain. The private access level is an access that only can be done by the object itself. Okay, so if the attribute or the method have been given a private access level, it means that only the function or only only a function from the same object can access the attribute or the private method, the private attribute or the private method. So the scope of this access only one or a single object level. So the other object will cannot access the attribute or the method if you giving the access level private. And uh, and for the protected uh, protected level access, it is described for the inheritance access level. So if you give a protected access level, then this if you give a protected access level to an attribute, let's say, then this attribute can only be accessed from that that class or another class that inherit from or inherit into that class. Like I said in this example, if you give a, a protected access level for this attribute, then this attribute will can only be accessed by the class inherited by them. Okay, so protected level is only the scope of the protected level is only a class with is inherited class, not with the other class that is not inherited by that uh, inherited, not the class that not inherited by that class. Okay, so the access level will only become to the family of the class, or let's say the family, because it's a family hierarchical structure, have a direct relationship or inherited by the class. So if the object is not belong to that family, then he cannot or it cannot access the attribute or the method that being given the access level of protected. And for the public access level, it means that you don't have any protection or you don't have a class access protection for the method or the attribute. So if you set the component into public, then all the class can access it freely and access it directly. Okay, so you have to clearly define about which component should be given a private and which component should be given a public access level. Okay, nice question from Omar. Can one object have another object as an attribute? I would say yes, but this is an advanced question. Uh, we will discuss about it in the next meeting. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So basically, there are three access level in programming language: private, protected, and public. And in general, okay, in general, when you create a class, you should always think that the data of the or the attribute of the class should always be a private access level, and the method of the class should always be a public access level. So this is a general structure of the class. When you define a class, you should always remember in your mind or keep it in your head that the attribute of the class will always be a private access level, and the method of the class should be always a public access level. This is in general class. Okay, maybe in specific case you need to create or you need to give the attribute of public public level access. It's okay, but in general, the structure of the class will be using this rule. Okay, the attribute will always be private, and the method will always be public. So this is the role that I already explained you before. Both of them are human, but because they have a different player, different role player, then we also will define the object based on their role player. This person will become a customer object, and this person will become a salesperson object. So you need to clearly define the role player of an object. So in general, the encapsulation process is giving you like this example. We have a remote, we have a television. Okay, so a remote can only tell the television to turn on or turn off, to increase the volume or decrease the volume, changing the channel or changing the switching the channel or something else. But the remote will never know what is happening in the television side. Okay, when the remote tell the TV to turn on, the TV will directly turn on, but the remote will never know what is happening in the television side. That's the concept that the object-oriented offer. These are two different objects, and they are communicating each other by sending a message, or in this method, sending a signal. Okay, and it's also happen, uh, the concept also happen vice versa. The television will never know what is happening in the remote side. So hopefully the access level explanation that I already gave you will be described in general by using these pictures. So encapsulation is normally will be stated as an information hiding process. So the other object will never know the other the the other object's operation or activity. Okay, and it's the object an object will only operate by itself, and the other object will also do that things. And each other will never know the inside process of an object. They can only interact with each other by sending a message or sending command. So for a modeling class or a design class or a design model, instanced by and inherited by will be differentiated by this symbol. Okay. So this symbol means that this class 2 is created by the class 1 or instanced by class 1. And for this symbol means that this general class inheriting to the to the special class. So we can say that this special class inherit by the general class. Okay, so this is the superclass and this is the subclass. So the special class is part of not part is the family of the general class. So as I already mentioned before, what is inheritance? Inheritance in general means class hierarchy classification that allowing access to inherit or break down into another specific class. The new class will have the same attribute and method with the inherited class or the mother class. The inheritance is a mechanism to create a new class from an existing class. Okay. The subclass can be extended by adding new attribute and method that is different from the previous class. I will describe it more clearly in these pictures. So let's say we have a general class called vehicle. Vehicles. Vehicle can be anything. So let's say vehicle have an attribute like wheels and and colors. Okay. So it's so general, then we need to inherit it, inheriting this vehicle class into more specific class, like they say, like in this example, the vehicle class inherited into bicycle class, cars class, and rickshaws. Okay, so the cars will have wheels attribute and colors attribute, and the bicycle also have the wheels attribute and the colors attribute. Okay, and all the and also all the objects that have the same line in this or the same level in them. And in this example, the cars also uh, divided into another several kind. Like cars can be Chevys, Ford, and Austin. And more so on the Ford model, this decomposed into a Mustang, Escort, and Tempos, and so on. And uh, the Escort also be break down into the two-door type and the four-door type. Both of them have all the attributes and method from the mother class. So this two-door escort class will also have the vehicle attributes which is the wheels and the colors attribute. So this is the concept that trying to be offered in the object-oriented. So the more specific, like what is zebra? Zebra is a horse with stripes. So when you have a class, a horse class, and you want to be more specific into another class called zebra, then you need to inherit this class and by adding a specific method or specific attribute. In this method, you add a specific attribute which is stripes. Then it will become a new class called zebra. And this in this example, I would like to give you another things. Let's say we have a mammals class. Mammals class, mammals usually can do eating and can do sleeping. And and it will be inherited into dogs and human. Dogs and human are mammals. Okay, so it means that human also can eat and human also can sleep, and also the dogs can also eat and the dogs can also sleep. Okay, the specific method or the specific attribute that differentiate between dogs and human is this method. The dogs can bark, but human can talk. Okay, so in this matter, the dogs were able to bark and also able to eat and also able to sleep, but the dogs cannot is not able to talk. Okay, so this is the differentiation that the object-oriented programming offers. Okay, so all the method from the top class will be given into the class under it, but it cannot give the class that share the same level or share into another line like this one. Okay, right. Okay, so also the dogs will be decomposed into Bowser and will be decomposed into Butch. Okay, the Bowser is more specific method that the Bowser can bite, but the Butch can bark. But this is showing that if we have this kind of situation, okay, the dogs can bark. So why the Butch need to define another new function have the same name? So if you find out this kind of situation, it means that the barking method between dogs and bats are different. Okay, but the name is still called bark. Let's say a general dog, a general dogs will be barking like woof woof, like let's say, but only bats barking like using the woof 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 woof. Let's say so. The barking method between a general dog and a specific dog bats are different, but the name of the activity is still the same, which is barking. Okay, so this method or this activity will be named as a polymorphism, but we will discuss about polymorphism in the next few meetings, not now. But currently, I only want to describe you about the things called inheritance. And in a real world situation, like you have an employee with by having four attributes and one function, and you have another specific employees like let's say an hourly employee, salaried employee, and a consultant. All of this class must have all the attribute and the function from the mother class. Okay, so it's not necessarily needed to define the same attribute or the same method unless it has a different activity or a different value, like I already mentioned before about the dogs and the badgers dogs. So as you can see, the hourly employee has the attribute of hourly rate, and it has a method compute wages, and it is different with the salaried employee, where it has a specific attribute called annual salary and the stock option. So this attribute is specific, only belongs to this class, and other class cannot have this attribute or cannot use this attribute. And also same with the other class. Okay,
I'm sorry, sir. What is disjoint or incomplete in that?